Fellow St. Lucians, this is Openmike, and we are now commencing our program, which consists of 4 segments. The first 2 segments will be dealing exclusively with Dr. Sharon Belmar-George, the Senior Medical Officer, and in the other 2 segments, we'll be dealing with Mr. Parker Ragnanan, the Senior Environment and Health Officer, who is responsible for port health management and surveillance. I feel quite honored to have with me Dr. Belmar-George with me today, as this individual has had several years of experience in that field. And our subject today is on the Ebola virus, which has been a concern of mine for the last several weeks, based on what I have read and heard. And I'm going to highlight to the nation the areas we are going to endeavor to follow today. We probably will not be able to complete the entire agenda, but just that the St. Lucian public can take note of what our concerns are. First, the Ebola virus epidemic in Africa must not be taken lightly. The reasons for that is that distances these days no longer represent a comfort zone. The case of travel has eliminated these barriers. Right here in St. Lucia, there are African students who visit families at home in Africa and return, and the same applies to many CARICOM states. Some 30 days ago, there was a bit of an alarm in Trinidad when 2 suspected cases arrived, and the individuals were quarantined and the aircraft detained on the ground for some 2 days as a precautionary measure. How does one deal with the incubation period when symptoms are not particularly transparent? That is a big question. In light of St. Lucia's limited resources, how would the nation address the preventative side? God forbid, in the event that 1 or 2 Ebola-infected individuals slip through the net and crop up on the island. PAHO's presence on island is commendable, but so far Dr. Etienne appears to be concentrating mainly on communicable diseases. In our view, a more serious outlook needs to be addressed, taking into account that the U.S. are presently in the throes of making some $1 billion available immediately and sending some 3,000 military officers to Africa to construct short-term clinics and training programs to Africans in light of the serious consequences. President Obama highlighted the fact that nations could be wiped out and economies drastically destroyed if the Ebola situation is not carefully monitored. On that score, one can just imagine the responsibility of this ministry in connection with the Ebola virus. And I now will ask Dr. George, based on her experience and what has happened so far, if she could appraise the public on the areas of concern and the measures being taken to protect St. Lucia from this difficult problem, bearing in mind that limited resources are always a big question. Dr. George.
Thank you, Mr. Chasney. I would first like to highlight that when the World Health Organization declared the Ebola virus outbreak in West Africa a public health emergency of international concern, that highlighted the need for collaboration and international response. I also want to indicate that in terms of the region and in terms of the management of the Ebola virus disease, it definitely requires a national response. The Ministry of Health, even before it was declared by the World Health Organization, we recognized the threat that it did pose to us in the region, as much as the Caribbean Public Health Agency and the World Health Organization has indicated that the islands are at low risk in terms of having an outbreak. But it highlighted the need for us having everything in place in case of, in terms of improving and ensuring we have active surveillance to be able to detect if in case somebody with a history does develop the symptoms, and also in terms of being able to manage with our health system if we were to get a case. So it really highlighted the need to ensure that we would be able to have a response in place to ensure that we can both detect very early because of the nature of the disease, and also to be able to manage such a case here.
Question for you, Dr. George. I did some research on the virus, and I have noticed that, in 1976, the first recognition of the Ebola disease was in Zaire. In 1989, it was in Reston, Virginia. In 1990, in Texas. But the disturbing part is the fact that I've been watching the growing number in cases. For instance, in 1976, there were 280 deaths. There were 318 reported human cases with 280 deaths. In 1995, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is Zaire, there were 250 deaths. And what has happened there, I've noticed that there are approximately 5 different types of Ebola. They claim to have the Ebola virus, which is the, in Zaire, it's called EBOV, and there's another one in Sudan called BDBV, and there's another one, SUDV, and another one, TAFV, and another one called RESTV. Which one of those particular strains concerns you the most?
Well, there are actually 5 strains of the Ebola virus, and they're named based on where they were located. For example, the Ebola Zaire was named after the river where it was first, where it was first located. You have 5 strains. You have the Sudan, you have the Reston, but those 5 strains, in terms of their level of infectivity and their fatality rate, is different. Some of them are not known to cause disease in humans. I think of concern for us is the Ebola Zaire, which seemed to be the circulating strain. The fatality rate is between 50 and 90% in terms of the Ebola Zaire. Now, in past years, there have been outbreaks in different parts of Africa from the 1950s, as you have noted. But this present outbreak in Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, because of the magnitude of the number of cases and the difficulty in terms of control, it's much bigger than those in the past year. So that is why
question for you.
Concern.
Why has it been bigger, in your opinion, or from information derived?
In this case, it seemed to have affected a greater number of people. The spread seemed to be increased in those areas. I'm not sure why it seemed to be more widespread and less capacity.
I'm not a doctor, but I've been affiliated with a lot of medical friends, my family, quite a few of my brothers being doctors. Could it be that the resistance of people have dropped? Or is it the strain that's getting stronger? Like, for instance, you know, when one takes an antibiotic.
You're talking about resistance,
yes.
in terms of resistance. I think maybe in terms of the increase in travel may also be one of the
exposure.
Yes, exposure,
Yeah.
and also it's a virus, so there's a greater chance in terms of mutations. I mean, that could also be, but it's not for sure why. But in this case, it seemed to be spreading faster than the past outbreaks.
Yeah. Now there was. Go ahead. There was a question which came to my attention, which I mentioned to you early, concerning the antibodies, because in one of the countries, they, oh yes, it is here. In Texas, Virginia, 4 humans developed Ebola antibodies after contact with monkeys imported from the Peru. None of the humans has symptoms. Can you just highlight that?
For the Ebola virus, the natural reservoir has still not been confirmed. In certain parts of West Africa, it is thought to be that it may be the fruit bat, which when you look at the transmission pattern, it is thought that the fruit bat would eat the fruits, the monkeys would eat the fruit, they would get infected, and persons in contact with those monkeys. Now, one of the things that we also need to make clear is that the monkeys, the chimpanzees, the apes, when they get Ebola, they die just as quickly. They get just as sick as humans, a human being, right? And they also die out. Now,
do they and they can spread it also?
Yeah, they can.
To monkeys or to people?
To monkeys and to people as well. When humans get in contact with those monkeys, or, for example, there are certain rituals where the monkeys may be eaten. It could also increase the transmission in certain parts of the world.
Now, question for you. When the transmission of Ebola from a monkey to a human, is it as dangerous as from the Ebola virus to a human being?
Well, it is the same virus. It is just how humans would end up getting that Ebola,
so,
and then we could...
going through the monkey, it does not become diluted in any way?
No, it does not. Yeah. It does
because,
not.
You know, I remember very clearly some 35 years ago, we were infested here with bilharzia, because my brother was a doctor in Sofia then, and it was then that I learned that the bilharzia, you could only get it after it went through the snail, and it was liberated.
Yes,
yeah, but
because that was a part of the life cycle of the schistosomiasis. Is the actual name of the disease. It's part of the cycle. So you would get it when you bathe in the rivers.
That's right, correct.
From the infection of the snail.
So, well, St. Lucia, we have just come to the end of the first segment of our program. We'll be right back.